This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, the award-winning writer Sharon Dilworth, is the author of two collections of short stories, The Long White and Women Drinking Benedictine, and two novels, Year of the Ginkgo and My Riviera. Her newest book, Two Sides, Three Rivers, is a collection of stories that take place right here in Pittsburgh. Sharon has won a National Endowment for Fiction grant, a Pushcart Prize in Fiction, and a Pennsylvania Council on the Arts grant. She also happens to be the director of the Creative Writing Program at Carnegie Mellon University and lives and writes right here in Pittsburgh. So it's a great honor for me to have the brilliant Sharon Dilworth join me in the studio today on StoryBeat. Sharon, welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's a great pleasure to have you here.
It's really fun to be here.
Well, so let me just jump right in on something that we'll talk more about in a moment, but I'm curious, do you have a preference between writing short stories or novels?
You know what? I just am putting aside a novel that I've been working on for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now I want to write short stories. So I think it's whatever I'm not battling right now. And right now I'm having a really hard time with a novel. So I decided I would start going back to short stories.
So sometimes that break from one to the other is actually helpful.
It's really helpful.
Gives you a little artistic distance, doesn't it?
And all of a sudden I go, novel is so long and takes so much time. And you're with the same characters. And I thought, I just need to write a short story.
It's kind of like a little palate cleanser.
It is definitely a palate cleanser.
But,
yeah.
And so many artists tell me that their favorite thing is what they're working on right now.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So what were your earliest inspirations and influences in life? Especially in terms of writing, I'm talking about.
I think I grew up in a house where my folks were kind of emotionalists, and we didn't really, we were the opposite of the loud Italian family. We were all kind of sitting in our corners, alone. And for me, what I did was I started reading. And I think like most writers, I read everything I could get my hands on. And that was really inspiring because I saw different worlds, different people, and I embraced that.
Were you an only child?
No, I had siblings, but I mean, we were close, but we just didn't. It wasn't it wasn't emotional or fraught or anything, and it was just kind of like a solid household. So, and I was looking for conflict and drama, and I didn't have that at home, so I got that in stories.
Well, you certainly could find it in fiction, that's for sure.
I definitely found it in fiction.
Indeed. So what was then your first creative love as a reader of fiction?
I think when I was in about 7th grade, we read the book The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton.
S.E. Hinton, sure.
And I don't know why, but I loved it. And when the teacher told me that it was a woman who wrote it, I just about died.
Just like J.K. Rowling, people didn't know it was a woman for a while.
I couldn't believe that she had maintained this male voice, and neither could the men in the class, the boys in the class. So I was so shocked that you could do that you could fool an audience, that you could be someone completely different. And that stuck with me for a long, long time.
It's very interesting, because obviously I teach screenwriting, you know that,
right.
And you teach screenwriting as well. And certainly in fiction and in a lot of screen stories, whoever's writing it are writing about characters they couldn't possibly have known. I mean, the people that wrote Ants certainly couldn't have known or spoke to ants.
Right.
So you have to kind of be able to get out of that. That's part of the job of the novelist / short story
Right,
writer.
and I think the first time you realize it's so shocking that, well, for me it was shocking, that it gave me this liberation that I could do something in fiction that I couldn't do in my life.
Have you read the rest of Hinton's?
I read everything of Hinton. Yeah, loved her.
And of course then Francis Ford Coppola turned two of those
Which
into
I thought
movies.
was a really good movie.
Well, both Rumblefish and
I liked Rumblefish
and
too.
The Outsiders, right?
Yeah.
So what was it then that led you to suddenly pursue the life of a writer? Did you start writing as a young girl?
No, I think I always wanted to be a writer, but I couldn't tell anyone because I was afraid of failing. So I just kind of kept it in and didn't tell anybody. And all of a sudden, I was living in Miami and I was teaching English as a second language. And I remember I used to get the New Yorker and I was reading a Donald Barthelme story, who I love. And all of a sudden, I thought, you know what? I have to do something if I'm going to be a writer. I'm getting older. I should start. So I went to
About what age were you at the time?
26.
26. So you weren't a teenager.
I wasn't a teenager.
Got it.
And I went to Florida International University, and I took a class from I can't remember his name right now, but Carnegie Mellon University publishes his poetry, and I took his summer class in creative writing. And I remember at the end of the class, I went to his office and I said, "Do you think I have what it takes to be a writer?" Which, of course, he couldn't answer. But he was really sweet, and he asked me what I was going to do, and I told him. And I was moving to Detroit to start a resort beachwear company with my best friend.
Oh, the perfect transition for a writer.
Right, because that's what most people do when they want to, and they move to Detroit. And he said, well, while you're in Detroit, Charlie Baxter teaches at Wayne State University. Why don't you try taking a class with him? So I did.
So this was, you're in your mid-20s, and you finally started to look into this as a serious thing because you knew in your heart.
I really wanted to do it.
And so I tell my writing students all the time, and you probably do something quite similar, is that I have students that come up to me and will say, when are we going to get started on X, Y, or Z? And I'll say to them, what is stopping you now? Right? So to be a writer is like the cheapest thing in the world to do. All you need is you and a pen and a piece of paper, and you're a writer. Right? Now, the question is, can you turn that into a professional thing?
Exactly.
That's a whole different story, right?
Right.
So all right. Now you've gone off to Detroit, and now you're writing. Are you writing mostly short stories at that point?
I was writing short stories, and I was taking classes at Wayne State University with Charlie Baxter and with other writers there. And it was an amazing experience. I loved it. I ended up getting a master's from Wayne State. And then I didn't know what else to do, so I applied to Michigan to go to their MFA program and luckily got in.
So you're now, what, approaching 30-ish?
Yeah.
And so you're actually kind of right in the pocket of where I think most graduate schools should be accepting students as writers.
It was a perfect time for me. I'd been away from school. I really wanted the time to write. I met some great writers there, but mostly what I did was I wrote.
Of course, and at that point, for instance, UCLA's screenwriting program, they don't tend not to accept writers who are under the age of 25.
That's exactly what Michigan does.
Right, and I'm sure there are some that get in. Well, in fact, I know there are some that get in there, and probably at most of the major schools that have that kind of a program, they wait till you have a little life under your belt.
Right.
So you have some stories to tell, and you've met some characters.
Yeah, and I think you have to be a little hungry when you get your MFA, and I was really hungry. I really wanted it.
So you studied hard.
I studied hard, and I wrote hard.
And would you say that is the proving ground for yourself?
Absolutely. For me, it was.
That's where it happened.
Right. I remember we had to teach freshman composition. That was part of our stipend. And I would teach from 8 to 9 to get it over with. And then I would go to the nursing facility. Why? I don't know. Because they had a computer lab, and I would work there all day. It was like my office. I just hung out there and
everyone
wrote.
knew you at a given point.
At the nursing.
Here she comes again, right?
Well, they just gave me they just cleared a little computer for me.
That's Sharon Station.
They didn't know my name, but they were like, she's not the nurse.
That's pretty good that you worked your way in there.
It was great.
And at what point in either then or beyond it did you think to yourself, I'm pretty good at this. I can do this?
I don't know if I knew I was good. I knew that I wanted to do it, and it was just a haven for writers at Michigan at the time. Nicholas Delbanco had just taken over running the program, and he is really an artist, and he invited every single contemporary author at the time in, and we got to meet with them, we got to talk with them. He invited a lot of women writers in, which really influenced me. I remember he invited Margaret Drabble, the English writer, in, and she was fantastic. She had never really taught in an MFA program, And I remember I had a tutorial with her, and she said, I don't know what to do, but I read your story, and it's about working class people, and I'm from working class. So we kind of bonded over that.
Mm-hmm.
So and that was really important to me.
That you met somebody that had sort of your similar sensibility.
Or just that you could be a writer and not know everything. She didn't know what to do, and I just wanted to learn from her, and I loved her books.
When you went into it, did you have a good sense that this is not necessarily the most money-oriented, money-making profession you could go into?
I think I always had like a second job. I was always waitressing. I was always bartending. I was always earning money. I don't think that was my goal. Did I think I was going to get a job in it? No.
You wanted to write just because you wanted to write.
I just wanted to write.
And that's another theme that I see repeatedly with most artists is they would do it even if nobody paid them to do it.
I definitely would have, but I think I didn't know that you were supposed to get a job in it. I wasn't there yet. You
were studying it just because it appealed to you, not because it was some sort of a means to an end.
I was so glad to get into Michigan and to study with these people that, I wasn't thinking career yet.
Okay. So at some juncture, when did you sell your first piece? When did that happen?
Unbelievable. I was in my second year of MFA, and I won the Iowa Short Fiction Award.
Oh, wow.
So I got my book published.
That's a big deal.
It was amazing, yeah.
So it was a book of short stories? So that was in your second year of grad school? That's a big-time honor.
It was unheard of,
especially in Iowa, because Iowa is famous for turning out great writers.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Did you spend time in Iowa?
No. I just won if you win the Iowa Award in short fiction, you couldn't have gone to Iowa.
I see. So, okay, so now you have sold something. Did you think I'm the cat's meow? I'm good to go?
No, but I was pretty happy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what was your plan after that? What did you do?
Well, then I realized I could go on the job market. And everyone told me, okay, now you can go on the job market.
Well, so now you've come out with an MFA, right?
I have an MFA and I have a book.
And you have an MFA and a book, so now you can go looking for a job. Well, the job market for writers is what? Universities.
Universities.
And so did you immediately go to CMU?
I did.
And they took you right away?
Yes.
That by itself is unique.
It was an amazing jump.
And you've been there for a number of years now.
I've been there for 30 years.
Is that all? Just 30?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like one of the old people at the table going like, we never used to do it like this.
And so you now know after being there for 30 years, and I'm only guessing because I actually don't know, but I'm betting on it, that the way that you got in there is not normal. That someone just coming straight out of school.
Absolutely not normal.
Not normal.
Right.
That it takes a long time for people to get a job like that.
Exactly.
So you know how special that makes you.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go that far, but I was really, really lucky.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So I think that's phenomenal. I love hearing stories about people who jump right in somehow. I also love hearing the opposite, which is my story, and I don't mean I love hearing my story. I mean I love hearing other people's stories where out of college, it took me 13 years before I got paid to be a writer.
I understand that, yeah.
So there's both ends of the spectrum. One is you jump right in like you did, which is fantastic.
But I don't think I jumped right in. I mean, if I counted the number of years after undergrad and
well,
what
that's
I did.
True.
Right.
Well, that's true. Except you weren't looking for that at the time.
Exactly.
So, and I was.
Right.
So
right.
That's the difference.
All right.
So if you'd come out of graduate school and it took you till you were 45 years old to get a job at university, that would be, I'd go, okay, took you a long time to mature that way.
Right.
So that's a really cool thing. All right. So at some point you wound up here in Pittsburgh at CMU.
I did.
And you're now in your 30s, right? 31-ish, 2-ish, 3-ish, somewhere in there?
Right.
All right. And what did you think of Pittsburgh? Had you been here before?
Never. Oh, yes, I had been here once before with my family. We had friends who lived out in Mount Lebanon, and I remember they took us up the incline. I thought that was so cool.
Well, it's very unusual.
Yes.
there aren't too many inclines in the world.
Right. And so I thought that was just so cool.
Funiculars, as they call them.
That's right.
And was Pittsburgh inspiring to you, aside from you had a job now, but was the city of Pittsburgh inspiring to you as an artist?
Pittsburgh was so interesting when I moved here. I think 30 years ago
Not like today at all.
Well, it was different. It was, there was a youth retention movement. There weren't a lot of young people. I would say the university was exciting. There, it was great to work at Carnegie Mellon. It still is. But like if you went someplace, you might be like one of the few young people there.
So the city was sort of dying in a way.
Right. I remember we used to go to Station Square, the Gandhi Dancer. I think that was the best restaurant.
And now Pittsburgh is a
Unbelievable.
Epicurean heaven.
Right. And I remember we
haven.
would drive all the way to Station Square, to go to eat someplace. Yeah. So it was a little different. But I found the city to be really inspiring. I remember when I was here, Tony Buba had just made the movies about Braddock.
Right.
And I thought Braddock had like a little bit of Detroit, where I'm from, atmosphere, and I really liked those movies, so I would go explore Braddock. I loved Homestead. I remember Kyoto's, the bar there, which I thought was like nothing else. Do you remember Kyoto's?
I do not.
You don't?
Well, see, I'm not going to go through my story. It's your
Okay.
show. But I left at 17,
right.
and I didn't come back for 40 years except to visit. So
Okay.
there are
Kyoto's
lots of Pittsburgh I don't know from that
Kyoto's
era.
was a bar right in Homestead that was filled with women's underwear. Maybe I wouldn't like it so much now, but it was so crazy.
You mean when you say filled with it, not on the tables?
No, they hung it from the ceilings like bras, and I think,
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, someone will correct me on that, but I think that's right. Yeah.
That seems to me that might not go over so well today.
Right now, right. But they had a garden, and you would eat like mystery sandwiches.
Mystery sandwiches.
If they were meat.
But you don't know what meat.
I don't.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
I would say you're very brave, and I'm glad to see you're still here.
I don't think I was the only one.
How many, when you're in writing mode, do you write every single day?
I do.
And so how many hours a day typically do you work?
It varies, but I always try to get some writing in, not because I feel I have to, just because I want to.
Mm-hmm.
So some days I'll work 6 hours, some days I'll work half hour, some days I'll just work for 5 minutes.
Do you have a routine? Do you use it early morning, late night, or does it not matter?
It doesn't matter.
You write whenever.
Whenever I can.
Are you able to write in a crowd?
I am, because I have, my kids are now in college, but when they were young, they were in the house. And I really learned to just write when they were watching Barney or when they were taking a bath. I would bring the, laptop in the bathtub in the bathroom, and they would, they would play, and I would write. And
Did you find as you were writing a sentence, sometimes I love you, you love me would just leak into the writing?
all the time, and I thought that was okay in its own way. But I would sit and look at Barney and wonder about the cast of characters, where they were, and I would write little stories about them. So,
Really?
A little bit, yeah.
Do you sometimes write not having any intention to complete something, to write it so that it exercises another part of your brain?
Or it's just on your mind that day.
So in other words, you will write something that you know has there's no end for it. It's just something to write.
For instance, the other day I was cooking, and all of a sudden I had this memory about this woman. I used to babysit her kids, and I get this really clear memory of her, and I remember like her husband was so mean to her. And so I was thinking about that, and he was always mad because I wouldn't talk politics with him when he came home from work. And I remember thinking, yeah, I don't really know anything about Reagan, so I can't really talk anything about him. And I remember thinking, she would cook everything for him, and she would work, and I just had this idea about writing a story about her. So I just sat down and wrote a couple things about my feelings about how much I liked her and how much I didn't like him. And I thought, well, God, that's so political. And at the time, I didn't realize it. So I don't know where it's going, but I just had this memory of it. So I just wrote it down.
So, all right. So we're going to get into process here in depth in a moment. I'm still sort of on the edges of it. Do you, when you conceive of an idea, when a story idea comes to you, how frequently does it come fully formed?
Not very often.
So you might get a kernel of an idea, or do you come to story ideas off of a title idea? Does that happen for you?
Not usually a title, but definitely an image.
An image.
Mm-hmm.
Could it also just be a character? You've got a character in mind, or is it usually an image?
For instance, I went to my son was really good friends with this guy who was in a diving competition at Chatham, and I went to watch him dive.
Right.
And all of a sudden, this story idea came into my head, just the idea, and just from watching these dives. And so that's how I started the story.
And it comes to you a lot that way?
A lot.
Because I know there's all kinds of different ways that people conceive of stories. And allegedly, again, don't mean to harp on her, but J.K. Rowling, allegedly, the whole world of Harry Potter, the whole canon of it came to her in a flash.
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
but that's the
Yeah.
story
No,
that's
I mean,
told.
I definitely believe it. I just can't believe it.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I've only had that happen to me twice,
Uh-huh.
where a story came to me. I knew the beginning, middle, and end. I knew everything that happened without minor details, but I knew what I was going to do. That's only happened, and I think that to me that's fun because that's like, oh, I got it. Now I can
Yeah,
just
I'd
go
like
do
that.
this.
It definitely happened to me once.
Okay, well, good. Would you call yourself a people watcher?
I definitely observe people.
How do you do that? What is do you have a technique or a trick, or is it just living?
I think I just notice certain things about people. Like I'll be looking in a classroom and I'll see, oh, that girl is pigeon-toed. I never noticed that before. Oh, and then I'll think, oh, and she must have such a hard time being pigeon-toed, and oh, and she's so awkward, and then that'll just stick with me. And then I'll think about a character who's pigeon-toed but really wants to be a dancer or something, and I'll try putting it together.
Is it called the pigeon-toed dancer?
Well, it could be.
Okay, so let's talk about development of story and character. You start with an image, right?
It's usually an image or something's happening, and I'll catch it. Like I remember one time I started a story. I couldn't believe people still did this. I saw a guy at the Manor Theater changing the marquee.
Well, for the listeners, the Manor Theater is a very old and famous movie house in a part of Pittsburgh called Squirrel Hill, which incidentally I grew up in. But it's a famous movie theater in Squirrel Hill. Okay, so now we're at the Manor.
Right, and he's changing the marquee. And I just thought, oh yeah, of course you still have to change the marquee. Like no matter how digitalized we are and how advanced we are in technology, someone has to change the marquee when the movies change.
Unless you have a digital marquee.
I don't think they do.
They don't. They still have an old-fashioned, got to change one letter at a time.
So I thought that was so funny, and I wrote a story about a guy who changes the marquee.
Okay, so now you've got this idea. You see the guy with the. I want to go through a process.
Go ahead.
You've seen this guy changing the marquee, and you go, wow, great idea for a story. What do you do next?
Okay, I don't think it's a great idea for a story. I think it's a great opening image.
Okay, good.
So then I start to think about that. Like, who is that guy who changes the marquee? Okay, so in my mind, it's someone who doesn't like technology because why else would you have that job? I mean, it's an old-fashioned job. So
right.
You'd have to be someone who doesn't like technology, doesn't want things to change. So I'm going to move it into a place that's completely changing, into a neighborhood that's really changing. And I think I moved the story to Miami, where everything is changing. Miami Beach is, attracting tourists, but he still wants to keep his little neighborhood the same. Mm-hmm. So now I start working like that and start thinking like that.
All right, so what's the next step? You start thinking that way. Do you then start jotting notes, or how do you work?
I start jotting notes, and I start to think about what the main problem is. And in that case, it was change. Like, he doesn't want things to change.
So is that then his goal in the story, is to keep things from not changing?
Yes, exactly.
And so that then becomes the spine of the story.
Exactly.
Okay. So do you outline? Are you an outliner?
I don't outline, no.
Never?
Not usually.
Even for your novels?
Nope. I just take tons of notes.
Wow.
Like in notebooks.
So do you know before you... All right, so let's just sort of jump around here a little bit. When you're writing a novel, which is different from a short story, clearly, and you have no outline, do you have a pretty good idea in your head before you start, or do you just go?
No, if you read my notebooks, they would just say, what does she want to do? What is she doing? Why is she there? And they just go on and on and on. And then I just walk in the park and I think. Then I just...
So in other words, your stories just develop naturally.
More organically.
More organically is a good word, which is very different from screenwriting, because most screenplays are outlined. Not that all are, but most are, because they're such a specific form.
Exactly.
And they have such a specific length to them that you kind of have to work them out ahead of time or you have a problem.
Right.
Whereas in a novel, you can go down many different roads if you wish.
Because I think a story, even a novel, is so based in character. So it's the character who's determining the form of the piece. And so how far that character is willing to go to get what they want is so important, and that's really that really determines what the piece is about.
Mm-hmm. You're more of a writer of drama than melodrama. Then you everything's character driven, not plot driven.
Definitely character driven.
Okay, so that's great. So now, and character's everything. Obviously, without really well drawn characters, you don't really have much. What do you do to develop character?
I guess I think about them and then think about them in the situation and what they're doing and why they're so frustrated. If I had to pick one theme of mine, it's that other people don't act the way that you want them to. And so, in a piece that I'm writing right now, it takes place in Aliquippa, and this woman adores Queen Aliquippa.
Okay.
And in fact, she wants to be Queen Aliquippa, and she's mad that everyone in her town doesn't even know who Queen Aliquippa is. And she wants to lead her people and to be a warrior, and no one respects that. And people only want sex with her and only see her as a sexual object. And she wants to be a modern day hero, and she doesn't know how to do it. And no one will respect her, and no one will act like she wants them to act.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so does she have a name? What's her name?
Her name is Rita.
Rita. Okay, so when you're conceiving Rita, it's all about notes for you. There's no specific form or technique or anything like that you use on a regular basis for character development.
Well, I've been working on that one for a while, and she has changed so much. So I've written drafts of it. So I can there's draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, and finally I'm trying to almost to the end of that one.
And typically for you, how many drafts before you say, hey, this I can show this to people now? It's
too many to count.
Too many. It's dozens.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
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 Same for me.
So when you say that it's am I outlining? No, but I keep knocking it out, and then it's like, it's not right, it's not right, it's not right.
Do you ever find that frustrating?
Yeah.
Of
course.
You do.
Yeah.
Especially in the long form.
Right.
Short story's a little easier.
It's a little easier. Yeah.
And so, okay, so when you're teaching creative writing, are you teaching that as the way to do it?
No, because I don't want to scare them. I would never want to tell somebody.
Your way scares me.
Yeah, I would never want to tell someone it took me 2 years to write this short story. They're young. They don't want to know that.
Well, sometimes it takes a painter years and years to do one canvas.
Right, and I think when you're a younger writer, and that sometimes you can hit right off. Like I definitely think I can avoid some mistakes that I used to make. Mm-hmm. And that I can write more efficiently, but I'm also missing that like beginner's luck that I used to have. Like I would do a story and I would just get it and write it out.
That's because you've thought about and written so much that you already are eliminating all of those things that you've already done or thought about, or things that don't work.
Exactly.
So it's a little bit more challenging over time, while it gets a little easier over time.
Right. So I wouldn't want to ever tell the students like I've worked on this for 2 years. Because I think they can have their beginner's luck.
Sure, mm-hmm. of course. All right. So, what would you say are I want to compare short stories and novels.
Okay.
What would you say are the bigger challenges of both, and how do you overcome them?
I think it's harder to get readers invested in a novel. I mean, you have to. There's a lot. I mean, they have to do a time commitment.
Hooking them in is a little more difficult.
Yeah, so you have to make sure that what you're giving them is worthy of a novel. I mean, of all that time. I'm sorry.
Because they're going to invest in you for a period.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, obviously, you're investing in you for a long period, but you want the reader to invest in you for a chunk of time.
Right, and there, I think you have to have the story. You have to have the whole arc of the story. And that involves a lot of characters, mm-hmm. Usually not just one character, even though both my novels are told from one character point of view. But you have to invest in that voice, and you have to really go through that journey.
It's okay. So that's why that takes you so long.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, right now you're kind of want to back up and take a little bit of perspective on the big one you're writing.
Right.
Dare I ask how long you've been working on it?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
And do you feel like you actually can get to the end of it, or do you feel like you're stuck?
I feel like I'm stuck, so I'm going to take a break.
Okay, so would you call it writer's block?
No, it's not writer's block. I just don't
burnt
know.
out on it.
Yeah, just burnt out on it.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. I understand there's a difference. Do you ever get writer's block?
Not usually.
I don't think you do if you're writing every day.
No, I actually don't get writer's block.
You've always got to. Do you have a trick for writers who tell you they have it?
Most people don't tell me that they have writer's block. They just say they don't have time to write.
And do you immediately see through that?
You know, I've taught in adult programs like Osher and stuff like that,
Sure.
and really enjoy teaching in them. And the one thing that I tell them is, like, I think most people say, okay, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to sit down for 6 hours and I'm going to write.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's too much. You know, it's just work for half hour.
Baby steps.
Yeah, or 500 words a day. 500 words a day is 2 pages. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So please don't write for 6 hours a day. It's like going to the gym on January 1st. Just go for 10 minutes.
It's like Stephen King. He's a machine. And
Mm-hmm.
he writes 5 or 6 pages a day, every single day, 7 days a week.
Right.
Day in, day out, day in. And after a short period of time, you do that for 3 months and you've got more than a novel.
Right.
Right.
Graham Greene, who's one of my favorite writers, wrote 500 words a day.
That was it.
That was it. And he wrote 18 books.
One of my writing teachers was a guy named Norman Corwin.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know who that
Yeah.
was? Norman was a famous radio playwright from the 30s and 40s. And one of his techniques he used to teach us was when you finish at the end of the day, finish in the middle of a sentence.
I've heard that, yeah.
So that the next day you pick up where you left off and don't feel like I'm not in that groove again. Now you can get back in the groove. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question I ask lots of guests, and it's a very challenging question. What for you makes a good story good?
It's hearing things in a different way.
What does that mean?
So there's a writer I'm reading right now called Sally Rooney, and I just read one of her short stories. And she just has this scene at the airport where she's being met by somebody. And okay, so that sounds like a regular scene. There's nothing fantastic about it, but it's the way that she presents it. She's in the character's voice, and the woman has just flown from Boston to Dublin, and her hair is so dirty that her head hurts, and she goes into the bathroom and she brushes her teeth, and the guy says to her, "You look like you borrowed that suitcase from somebody." It's just you can just tell like the character is jet lagged and tired, and it just sounds so interesting and so different and so real that I thought it was a great scene.
Okay, so I'm trying to still dig in as to what makes a story good then for you. Is it that the mood and tone of it?
The mood and tone, and mostly the voice, that you're kind of surprised by the voice.
The voice. Mm-hmm. And it will always, in a good story, be that writer's
right.
voice.
And I think there's a personality that's coming through.
That's interesting. And that's a very important thing for Hollywood writers, too, is that voice in your script that the studio can recognize. And there are, of course, writers who are able to erase their voice.
That's interesting, yeah.
And still make it work because they're coming at it from some different perspective. Okay, that kind of makes sense to me. Are there particular genre or type or style of story you most gravitate toward, both as a reader and as a writer?
I like realistic contemporary fiction.
Not science fiction.
I don't love science fiction. So I would say
not
no.
Thrillers or horror or any of that kind of thing. You like?
I like mysteries. More so, but definitely realistic contemporary fiction.
Do you read all of it though?
I read a lot. I read an awful lot.
I would bet you would have to.
Yeah.
And then you have to read a lot for your job as well.
Right. I actually love to read, so that's an easy part for me.
Not a burden.
No. Not at all.
I sometimes, I don't mind it either, but I sometimes find it a burden when it's I get a large class of unwashed writers, and it can be a little bit troubling when they don't have any of the mechanics right. They've got you're struggling to just get through what they're putting on paper.
I would agree with that, but then sometimes you read something, you're like, oh, that's surprising, that's interesting.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great when they really
when they hit.
Yeah, when they really hit it, you go, where'd that come from? That's great.
Right.
Yeah, I love that too. Are there specific places that you typically turn to for inspiration for new ideas? I know we've talked a little bit about that.
Not necessarily. I mean, like, it's definitely fun to meet someone new and you hear a story. I was just at a party and I met this woman and she said she was from Oil City. And I was like, you're kidding, really? I'd never met anyone from Oil City. And she started telling me about her life, and she started telling me about her mother, and her mother did historical research on the house she lives in Lawrenceville. And it just all sounded so interesting and so fresh and new. And right away, I kind of wish I had a notebook and I would start taking notes. It is hard to bring out your phone and record people. It's not considered nice. But I definitely wanted to do that. She was so interesting and so lively. And you kind of want to say, hey, can we go have coffee and I can just write the story of your life? Most people don't like that, but that's how I get ideas. I meet people and I try to record what they tell me.
Do you ever do what I call, well, I don't call it, it was taught to me a long time ago, a thing called an eavesdropper exercise? Do you ever do that?
I know what that is, yeah.
So you're sitting with your back to people so they can't see you writing, but you're actually writing the conversation down?
Right,
I think that's a fantastic exercise.
Right, but it's even easier if you can ask the questions yourself.
Well, of course.
You can lead the conversation, yeah.
Let's talk about the process of publishing.
Okay.
So you've been published several times.
Yes.
In both magazine form and also in book form.
Yes.
All right. So are there things that you do now that make the process of getting a publisher or publishing easier for you?
I probably know that like on the Two Sides, Three Rivers, I knew that it was a regional book, and I was really excited when I met Heather McAdams, and she's Bridge and Tunnel Books. So I knew that Two Sides, Three Rivers was definitely a regional book. And when I saw that Heather McAdams from Bridge and Tunnel Books was looking for novels and short story collections about the area, I was really happy to send the short story collection, and she accepted it. And I was thrilled to be working with someone here who would promote it regionally. So that was really important to me.
And have you worked closely with them?
I worked really closely with her.
Did they edit you as well?
She edited me amazingly.
Really?
Yes.
And did you enjoy the process of being edited?
I loved it.
Great. So in other words, the idea that somebody else is looking at your work and giving you the outside feedback that you may have lost the forest for the trees kind of thing.
She was great. She's a really good editor.
Cool.
And anyone lucky enough to work with her is going to be very fortunate.
All right. So what would you say are the things that writers should concentrate on in order to be published?
I think you have to know your market. So if you write something about undergraduate life, there's a lot of magazines that look for undergraduates to and that only publish undergraduates. So if you're an undergraduate, why not get started there?
Well, you need that. You need what they used to call tear sheets. I don't know if they still call them or not.
I know what you mean, yeah. And so, like success builds on success. So, maybe don't start out with the New Yorker, but get, some of these undergraduate magazines and get published in them and then start to build on that. You
need a portfolio.
Exactly.
And you need to prove that other people think that you can write.
Right.
And then other people think that you can write.
Exactly. and I think that's a great way. I mean, look, if you're writing a story about maybe that takes place in the Midwest, try the Indiana, Review or something like that.
Sure.
I think it's a really good idea.
Sure. I mean, again, it's a matter of building up, I guess, what you would call a portfolio. I mean, that's really what it is. It's not just a school portfolio. It's a life portfolio. It's a real professional portfolio.
Right. And then you have a brag.
And then you have a brag and they say, well, what have you done? And well, I've done this, and then they can actually go and see it online or on paper.
Right. And you have a blue chip, and then you can turn that in when you need it.
That's right. Yeah. So I think that's a really wise thought on that. So you clearly in your career have received notes from people.
Yes.
How do you handle notes? What is your philosophy on note taking from others?
I have readers who I trust. And they don't always agree, but I definitely listen to them. And if I'm really, really stubborn that day and I go, nah, I don't want that. But other times I'm like, you know what? She's right. This isn't working, and I'll put it aside. So I think you have to really trust your readers and collect the few people who know your writing and who believe in you, and then you trust them to tell you the truth.
What do you do when you receive notes that you find are off the mark and maybe confusing? How do you handle it?
Well, I think you have to. Just recently, and this is why I stopped writing the novel, I gave it to a friend who's a writer here, and I trust her. And she sounded so unenthusiastic about the novel. She's like, yeah, it's okay. She had read about 100 pages of it, and she just wasn't really into it. And so, you know what? I thought, you know what? It's not right. Something about it isn't right. So that's why I'm putting it aside. So I trusted her. Did I resent her? No, because I think she was telling me the truth. And I think it takes a lot for someone to tell you that.
Well, yes, I think it's very difficult for a person to give you that kind of a note,
Right.
especially if they're a good friend. Because
Exactly.
you don't know if it's going to damage the friendship. Or
Right.
not.
And she was careful about it, but then I kept, tell me, and she did. And so I thank her, and I'm going to put the novel aside for a little bit.
So I will add on top of this that one of the things that I teach, because it's the way it is in the real world, for me it is anyway. I mean, I've got 90 teleplay credits and have received nothing but one long siege of notes over a long time. And one of the philosophies that I adopted a long time ago, when I first started writing, I didn't want to hear anybody tell me my work wasn't any good. And students, you see, frequently are afraid of notes. They think you're mad at them or something because you've given them a note. And my philosophy that I teach them is you take every single note. You don't have to agree with it, but you never know when that note, even if you disagree with it, will trigger some other thing that will actually make your work better.
I think that's really smart. Yeah.
So a professional says, okay, I'll take your notes, but I'll only use that which I can actually work with.
And the difference might be that I would never give somebody something that was totally in process. That I would have to have a certain level of completeness.
So in this case with your novel, you gave it incomplete.
It was 100
someone.
pages that was pretty solid.
So
it has to come to a certain level for me.
Got it. I tend not personally. It's a personal thing. I tend not to like to give anything that isn't fully complete to someone.
Okay, and I know what you mean, but mine, the 100 pages that I gave this reader were pretty complete.
Okay, so,
I'd worked on them quite a bit.
All right, so in other words, you needed feedback.
I needed feedback.
You were
right.
at that point, and now you've gotten that feedback, and now you're one of your methods of, it may not be a method, but one of your ways of dealing with the notes that you didn't necessarily want to hear. Obviously, everybody wants to hear, hey, this is the best thing ever. But you've now been given notes that have stopped you for the time being.
Yes.
So you're thinking.
I'm thinking.
You're in cogitation mode.
Right. I'm boiling something.
Okay. I think that's a really important thing for listeners to understand, that unless you're on a specific tight deadline, there's nothing stopping you from backing up.
Exactly.
And that you should feel free to do that and don't feel defeated by it. Do you feel defeated by it?
No.
No. You just feel like, wait a minute, I got to stop and rethink it.
Actually, to be quite truthful, I feel kind of relieved. Because it wasn't working, so I can step away from it and not feel like I have to finish this.
So in a weird way, you got confirmation.
I did.
That what you were thinking isn't working.
Unfortunately, I did.
Okay.
Or
And
fortunately.
do you ever write a whole bunch of stuff and then realize that the story started on page 80 or 100 or something like that and throw it all away? Does that ever happen to you?
All the time.
All the time.
Right. I remember I was working on this section a long, long time ago, and I was teaching at the Kenyon Writers Workshops in the summer. And it was about 100 pages, and I had been working on it, and it didn't work. And then I was driving to Kenyon, to Gambier, Ohio, and all of a sudden I went, oh, I can just say, then they went to Mississippi and cut that 100 pages out.
Sure.
I was so happy. And who couldn't have figured that out? Not me. It took me, but I remember like where I was on the road, and I wrote, just say, then they drove to Mississippi.
Well, this is a good opportunity to talk about Aristotle.
Okay.
Okay. So Aristotle, who didn't talk about acts or movements or anything else, he talked about beginning, middle, and end.
Yes.
And he said that don't start your story before it begins, don't end your story after it ends. And so this happens frequently to writers, especially screenwriters, but also to novelists and short story writers, is you've written something and realize, I don't need this to tell the story. Out it goes.
I know.
Challenging.
Right.
Going back to Faulkner, you have to be willing to kill your darling.
Absolutely.
And that is probably, I think, one of the bigger, more difficult things that writers go through as a young writer, More mature writers, it's a lot easier.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, but I didn't see in the 6 months that I'd been working on those pages
That they weren't necessary.
That they weren't necessary. I thought they were vital. And then driving to Ohio, which I would recommend, it just came to me, and I was like, ugh, I'm so slow.
No, I think that's I don't want to call that slow. I would prefer to think of that as your process.
I do, but
I mean, you think of it as slow.
no, I just think it's
Why didn't you get it immediately?
Exactly.
Well, because you didn't get it immediately.
Of course.
That's the way it is. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that is part of the process.
I do too.
Because lots and lots and lots of, there's hundreds, if not thousands of stories of writers writing 100 pages of a novel to throw it all out.
Right.
Because they realized it didn't start back then. It started over here, not there.
Right. Exactly.
And that this is not, there's no point to any of this.
Right. Right.
Well, that's frustrating as hell, but yet it's vital to making the story work.
Exactly. And I think you can think about writing a lot, but it doesn't count unless you're really writing. And then you go, okay, I finished that story. That was good. It was okay. And then you go on to your second story, and then you go on to your third story, and then you go on to your fourth story, and you have to keep building. It's like learning a foreign language. You can't skip the steps.
Yeah, of course. And no, you can't, as I frequently say, you can't go down the street to the story store and go buy yourself stories.
I wish you could some
It
days.
would be lovely if you could,
Right.
but you can't. You have to actually do the work.
Exactly.
And some writers just have a more easy facility for it than others. And if you have to work at it, you have to work at it. I have to work hard at it. It's not easy for me.
I do too.
It really causes me to spend a lot of time.
Right. And I do think it's like learning a foreign language. So there are different ways to do it. Some
Sure.
people are more, they can just pick up a language. Some people have a French boyfriend or girlfriend, so they learn it that way. Some people go work in the French restaurants, they learn it that way. There are different ways to learn it, but you finally have to, put in the work.
Well, okay, so this is a phrase I say all the time. The only difference between a writer and a non-writer is a writer writes.
Exactly.
And the only difference between a professional writer and a writer is that the professionals figured out how to get paid.
I would agree with that.
So you got to write.
Right. And
There's no
I
substitute.
think you actually have to finish something too.
I agree. It has to be complete.
Right.
But the only way, again, back to Aristotle, the last step is you have to be willing to put it out in the world and show people.
You do.
Without that whole circuit is not complete.
Right.
So that's a part of the process, is getting it into the world.
Exactly.
Not just putting it in a trunk in your house and forgetting about it, right?
Right.
Okay, so you've been teaching for, as you say, 30 years at CMU. What would you say are the most common mistakes that student writers make, and how can they avoid them? What would you say are the most common ones?
I would say, this is going to sound different, but I would say that a lot of my students come in, they're incredibly talented, and they just don't know what they want to do. So and writing is hard, and it is hard to get to the end of it or to stick with it. So they don't.
They give up.
They give up.
So it's so the biggest mistake that they make is not being not having stick-to-itiveness. Mm-hmm. What is the word I'm trying to draw?
Well, and I think like they'll certain students will write me years later and say, I'm finally thinking about getting that MFA, and I'm like, yeah, you could have gone anytime. You're such a strong writer, but you just didn't. I mean, so maybe they don't want it. Maybe it's
patience and persistence.
Yeah, maybe it's not a life for everyone.
Well, it's definitely not a life for everyone, even if you have the dream of it.
Right.
Right, and a lot of people. Well, you certainly have met in your time at school lots of wannabe writers who really didn't have it in them. Right. It's a fantasy that wasn't right.
Right. But I've also met students who are so good at what they do, and maybe they're good at everything, but they definitely could have been writers. They just didn't see it to the end.
Right.
A project or something. Mm-hmm.
They just didn't tough it out. Mm-hmm. They gave up.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's bloody hard to do.
It is hard.
It is not an easy thing.
Yeah. But then they'll write me, and they have a job at in Silicon Valley or something. They're like, I'm bored, and I'm like, of course you're bored, because you have an imagination and you're a lovely writer, and why don't you try both?
Well, sometimes it becomes a practical thing too.
Exactly.
Where they just simply have to figure out how to get a job to eat, and that job leads them away from the art,
right?
And they never get back to it.
And I understand that.
I do too.
Mm-hmm. I definitely understand
because
that.
you have to keep a roof over your head.
Of course,
you don't want to live in your car on the street.
Right? It's a tough life. Yeah,
it is a tough life. So good. All right. Well, we're coming toward the end of the show, and you've clearly met and dealt with lots of people of all sorts of ilk in your life. It's not ilks. No, ilk. And what would you say that you can share with us a story in which is weird, quirky, funny, offbeat, strange?
I'll tell you a funny story about writing. So everyone says you should write what you know. But for a while in my life, I was writing and then it would come true. Okay, which sounds really odd. But I wrote a story that took place in Detroit, and the kids go to this place on the Detroit River called Belle Isle, and they see this albino deer that comes out of nowhere.
Really?
And it scares them, and they decide to take it as an omen, and they go do something else. Come back to Pittsburgh, I'm hiking in the Allegheny forest, and I see an albino deer.
Wow.
Which I didn't think it really existed. It's so freaky. So I was like, wow, I just wrote that story about an albino deer. And everyone's like, no, you didn't. I was like, yes, I did. So that happened. Then I wrote a story about a woman who was traveling with a non-white woman, and they got a flat tire, and they were in the South. And they go to a trailer park, and because their car breaks down, and the woman at the trailer park will only let the white woman in to make the phone call. I'm driving up to Allegheny College to give a reading with my friend Geeta, who is Indian. We get a flat tire in Slippery Rock, outside of Slippery Rock. Right. We walk to a trailer park, and the woman will not only let me in the house. She will only let me in the house. And I thought, I have to stop writing. Or I should write a story where I win $1 million. But
that's a good idea.
Yeah, so things like that started to happen a little bit, and I got a little afraid of writing. But that was my weirdest thing about writing.
You were actually writing your future.
I know.
That is bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, you should just write the good stuff.
I know. But
you live to be 150. You hit the lotto.
So I wrote about a woman who stays in Pittsburgh for 30 years and loves it.
That worked out well.
It was great.
All right, last question of the day. Do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip? You've already given us a bunch, but do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for those who are just starting out in the business of writing or are somewhere in the business but are looking to get to that next level?
The most important thing I think you need to do is you have to find your friend group. You have to find your writer friends, and they're going to support you, and they're going to help you, and make sure it's not someone you live with, because you can never give a piece to your lover or to your boyfriend or to your girlfriend or to your mother, because they have to live with you. So you want to find a friend who will read it honestly and tell you truthfully. You want to find a group who are going to share your ups and downs. So I would say having writer friends to me is so important. And that's really what I would do. I would, and they're going to help you. They're going to give you the names of their agent. They're going to give you the names of their publishers. They're going to give you the names of friends who will help you. So I would say find friends who want to do exactly what you want to do. Make them your writer friends. Meet with them as regularly as you can and share your work.
I think that's really valuable, and I'm certainly glad to hear you say that. Do you believe in writers' groups?
I do believe in writers' groups if you're writing.
If you're writing.
Right. And sometimes it's better just to do it one-on-one, like a group, and then you just exchange, and then you get together over coffee, but you're a group, because I think really you need the one-on-one. Like, this is what I liked about your piece, this is what I didn't like, this is what drew me out, this is what drew me in, those kind of questions.
So what then the disadvantage to being in a group, like in a group setting in a room, is that not everybody's giving you that one-on-one?
And I'm not so sure that a big group is always so truthful.
Interesting, because there's peer pressure.
I think people want to be nice to each other.
Yes.
I mean, you never want to be the one who's ragging on on the writer. But I think if you can go out to coffee and you say, do you like this? And someone says, well, it didn't quite work for me. That's your sign.
Right.
So find writers you trust. And I would say one-on-one is probably best.
Well, this is very valuable. I mean, I truly believe in writers' groups, and I believe in that one-on-one feedback. And especially, sometimes it's difficult with friends, real good friends, because they don't want to tell you the harmful thing either, unless they're really a good friend and you trust them.
Right.
That's what you need, and that's what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Is developing those kinds of friends.
Right, and someone just says, hey, I love your work, but this isn't working for me. Oh, okay.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yep.
Sharon, this has been just fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's terrific to have you on the show, and really, you've given us so much wonderful information.
Thank you so much.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.